This is a News Channel 11 special. Our community, stronger together.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
No justice, no peace, cries ringing out not only around the planet, but right here in our region after the police killing of a black man named George Floyd.
This video was taken 2 months ago of protesters marching down East Main Street in Johnson City. While the street may be silent tonight, the fight to make our community stronger together is not.
Here at News Channel 11, we're taking a look at racial justice in the Tri-Cities and the impact of months-long protest. Joining our discussion tonight is Johnson City Mayor Jenny Brock, New Generation Freedom Fighters Chairperson Caitlin Yarborough, and Bethel Christian Church Pastor Vincent Dial.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it. As I watched the video, it struck me that it's been a while since we saw that happening in our streets. We want to know from the three of you, how do you see race relations tonight in the city of Johnson City? And we'll start with you, Mayor Brock.
Well, thank you, and thank y'all for holding this this very, very important conversation that we need to have today and tomorrow and never let it leave us. The last few months have been, for me personally, enlightening, because to hear these young people, walking the streets with them, hearing their stories, knowing that I didn't have the experiences that many of them have had, has really opened my eyes and my ears. And so I really have assumed the position of listening to understand, so that we know how to make our city better and more equitable for everyone. And this is about human rights, and that every single person, no matter what ethnicity or race or gender, is equally distributed among our population.
Caitlin, what about you? Race relations right now in the Tri-Cities.
Well, with COVID-19 cases flaring up, Facebook's getting really fiery these days. I think that there are a good amount of white folks in our community that are understanding what we are trying to say and understanding the movement itself. And then on the other hand, there are still lots of people in our region that still don't understand that it's not an anti-anything movement. And so, we've just got to keep the lines of communication open, and this is very important, so thank you.
Thank you for being here. And Reverend Dial, you.
Well, what I've seen is really so enlightening. It's like it's been a revelation is what it's been, because 20 years ago, there was conversation, but it was not public display of those conversations. So what's happening in the last 2 to 3 years, not only here in Johnson City, but around the nation, has been a new revelation of a topic and a discussion that should have been happening a long time ago, but it's happening now. And I think the impact is such a good impact, and it's so positive too. We got a ways to go, but we've come a long ways as well.
We're headed hopefully in the right direction. Caitlin, I want to ask you, what have you seen? What are some of the issues concerning race you see here in our region? And I know that's a very broad question.
It is. So if you don't know, obviously you all know, and Mayor Brock, our demographics are pretty slim as far as the minority population here. So representation is a huge glaring issue. You don't see many Black people, people of color, indigenous people walking around in our community, and so it's interesting to get in touch with everyone and form this bond and realize that the movement is much bigger than what I thought it would be for this region. So,
Reverend Dial?
Well, I guess Mayor Brock and I, every time we see each other, we end up having some type of improvised discussion. I think the African American population is about 3 to 3.5% of the total population. However, also too is when people come here, having those areas that attract them, that they want to stay here. And not, we've had several people of color to come but leave because it just didn't seem like this area was very, very accommodating and very welcoming. However, I see that changing too. And I think the university and all what it's offering and other industry, I think that's going to be a magnet to draw people in from all walks of life.
Let's hope so. As we head to a break, just one more time, let's look back at what happened in our community just a few weeks ago. Activists continue to hold Black Lives Matter protests across the country. We're taking a look at the movement's impact on this region when we return with our Stronger Together discussion after the break. We want to welcome you back to our News Channel 11 special, Our Community Stronger Together. We are tonight taking a look at race relations here in the Tri-Cities after what was an amazing spring and summer, packed with protests in our very streets.
You know, one of the things that I've always wanted to know is, explain, Caitlin, what does Black Lives Matter mean? Because there are many groups under a big umbrella. So is everybody protesting the same thing?
So Black Lives Matter means explicitly that Black lives do in fact matter. Whether you've experienced it or not, you have to believe when someone tells you that they have been treated as a second-class citizen. And in this community, it has happened to me, it's happened to my brothers, it's happened to my dad, to many of the people that I've met through this movement. And so I believe that everyone is protesting for the same things. Now, there are so many different facets of the movement that some folks are weighing in heavily on, including the reallocation of funds for the police, also known as defunding the police, not a good term to use. Exactly. I've been pretty vocal about how irresponsible it is for that to be used. In the media, it's quick to put on a poster, you know, reallocation of funds on a poster doesn't exactly translate in a march, but yeah, it's about human rights, as Mayor Brock said. It's just getting the respect that is deserved and owed, and the many, many hundreds of years of poor treatment, and it's still echoing today, and so we just have lots of work to do.
Mayor, what do you say when you hear people say all lives matter or white lives matter?
You know, I've had to kind of put this in a place where I could understand it as a legislator and a leader. What do we do with this? And absolutely, Black Lives Matter. I look at it as the kind of the human rights pie, and that every race, every ethnicity, the slice of the pie has to be the same. And if people think their slice is bigger and this slice is smaller because of many of these things, Caitlin, that you've talked about, and how Black people have been demeaned for 400 years, then we can't say all lives matter, because the big pie, you can't say that because this slice doesn't matter to a lot of people. So looking at it from a legislative standpoint, when we look at human rights, do all people in our community enjoy those same rights? Are they distributed equitably? Are they treated the same, from neighborhoods to being pulled over by the police to education? And that's the big piece I have to take a look at, and what we have to look at systemically within some kind of framework to make better.
Is there a difference in, Caitlin, Reverend Dial, please, either one of you, you can answer this. Is there a difference between the actual phrase Black Lives Matter and an organization that represents it, or is the organization just representing that idea? Because I think a lot of people get lost in where people are going.
I think Black Lives Matter. For so long, people of color were invisible in this society. We were relegated to certain positions or certain types of occupations, and because we were supposed to do that, I think one way we could see that is we look at movies from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s up until the 80s, and to see the type of work or the roles that these folk played, people of color. Black Lives Matter has to make a statement, because if Black lives don't matter, nobody's life matters. I think it's an all-inclusive statement, and some people can misinterpret that and take it the wrong way and want to come back with negative thought, negative words, and what have you. But it's saying that finally, folks, America's waking up. These young people are out in the streets, again, protesting, because lives all lives matter, but Black Lives Matter, in order to make it inclusive, all lives matter because Black lives matter.
Reverend, were you surprised to see what we're looking at video here of hundreds of people marching through Johnson City? As somebody who's lived here for many years, was that a surprise to you in any way?
Not really. Not really. I knew it was coming. I know this the talk and talking to young people. You know, they said we got to do something here in Johnson City because we just can't go on living this way. You know, there was a certain polarization in the communities. This group of people lived here. This group of people lived here, and the conversations. They say, well, we need to march. I say, well, you think about it, you pray about it, but what you going to march about? And after the march is over, what's your next step? So.
Caitlin, you were helping to organize that, and you were out there that day. Were you surprised by all the people that came?
Yes, definitely. Pleasantly surprised, of course. I didn't, initiate any of the movement here in our city. I joined in with some young folks, and I was just out on the corner of Commerce and State of Franklin with my sign after a couple weeks of depression. Literally couldn't eat, couldn't sleep after George Floyd's public murder. And my husband suggested, you need to probably go and protest. I think it will make you feel better. And it did, because I was surrounded by people that were feeling the same pain and wanting the same results and justice that I was. And back to the organization Black Lives Matter versus the phrase Black Lives Matter. There is an organization. We aren't affiliated with it. It's got its own, I think when was it started? It was after Trayvon Martin's murder down in Florida, which is actually in a neighborhood down from my grandparents' house. So I remember all of that happening. But as far as the correlation of the organization with the phrase here and globally, I think it is just the fact that Black Lives Matter, and we're screaming it from the rooftops these days.
All right, good stuff. Oh, wow, really just getting started. Our discussion into our community stronger together continues after the break. Up next, we'll look at why our region has few elected minority officials, as well as sensitivity training for not only local government, but for police. Next. Our Community Stronger Together discussion continues. We've been talking about Black Lives Matter, protests, and discrimination against the Black community. One reason may be lack of representation in leadership positions here in the Tri-Cities. There are few, if any, elected minorities in the office. And Mayor, I begin with you.
Yes, sir.
They are few, as I just mentioned, or any minorities in office, whether it be city, county, and even on a lot of the school boards.
That's right. I've thought about this a lot because during the last few years since I've been on the commission, to work harder toward getting, we're stronger when we look like our community because you hear all voices coming in at all times, so you don't get kind of behind the 8 ball on things. I think it can start with the city in appointing different community members to our boards and commissions, our committees within the city. And we are really working hard on that now to make sure that we're appointing people who really look like our community so everyone is represented. That's one thing. Number 2, in running for office, it's hard to run for office. And today it's getting even more complicated. The issues are very polarizing, and so I'm worried about anybody running for office in the future. But we need to mentor. I need to mentor. I'm going to mentor Caitlin here as she runs. We've already talked about her running. But we who are in elected positions can really do that, step forward and help more, encouraging them and give them the kind of clues that they need on what it's like to run for office.
I'm going to go ahead and get to this next question so we can talk about it as well, and especially because George Floyd, just the latest example, we're talking about training, police, de-escalation, things like that. And I know that Mayor Brock, you probably are the person to talk to about this first. When it comes to training, hiring, are there specific things that our officers who are in training and deputies go through to make sure that any situation is we don't have basically another George Floyd experience here?
Boy, that's a long answer.
I know.
Yes, but let me first start off by saying our police department is an accredited police department, and we're going through recertification right now. So with that, we have to meet very, very high standards, and that's high standards in recruiting and in training. The recruiting process weeds people out immediately. I mean, for bias. So if we get a class of 20, 10 of them may not make it through the profile for bias. So that kind of takes care of that group. But training is very explicit with executing the role of a police officer according to the standards that we have set. One of the things that Caitlin's, the New Generation Freedom Fighters, brought to us that we explored for hours, I guess, was 8 Can't Wait. And that's the 8 kind of issues or policy issues that are circulating the nation now. Well, 6 of those things, as we saw, the Johnson City Police Department already has in policy. One of them we needed to clean up a little bit and strengthen so there was no confusion. One of them was about data keeping, which has a very monetary value to it that we can't do immediately, but we'll continue to work on that. So we feel that we have good things in place. That doesn't mean we can't always do better and improve, and we are committed to doing that.
All right, coming up, what we have learned from recent Black Lives Matter protests, and more importantly, what changes have been made since. Our Community Stronger Together returns after the break. Welcome back to Our Community Stronger Together. We've discussed racial issues in our region, Black Lives Matter protests, sensitivity training. So what has been done since the protest, and has anything changed, anything happened, and where do we stand now?
I think that's the question to our guests.
Yes.
I mean, what do you think, Caitlin?
Well, I can speak for the New Generation Freedom Fighters. We've been meeting with our city officials. Thankfully, thank you for that, and that's going to continue to happen. We have formed committees now. So we have an education committee, a voter initiative committee. We've got a Black Lives Matter Arts Initiative Committee, communications, there are several. A faith and interfaith committee, so that people from all different religious backgrounds and denominations can come together to work on anti-racism and getting that in the pulpits and in the places of worship in our communities. We're also collaborating with lots of other organizations that are already very well established, like the NAACP. We've been working very closely with them and with other grassroots organizations. The New Panthers Initiative, they've been doing a lot of good community outreach, and we're currently applying for our nonprofit status. So there's just a lot of moving parts, and so we've had to slow the pace down just a bit,
Sure.
but that's so that we can cover all of our bases.
Let me ask Reverend Dial real quick. Education. Do you think people really know what racism is? Is it just about the N-word? And I mean, do we need to educate just what is racism?
Oftentimes, I think, as far as racism is concerned, is when one race may look at another race and feel that they're superior to them, just because simply as to who they are. But this is what's starting to happen. I think sometimes understanding things such as systemic racism and racism, it's almost like, you know, trying to understand what the Bible is saying with just sweeping over it. But I think now, because people want to see life become better, they want to see our society become a better society, a healthier nation, and having these type of conversations and sitting down and breaking it down. And you know, sometimes we have to have a dying moment. We have to be very honest with ourselves, because you have to ask each of us, am I racist? Do I have racist tendencies? You know, because oftentimes we want to point the finger at somebody. But this pandemic, I think, has been a time for us to reflect. Do I care about Black Lives Matter? Do I care about people's other ethnic backgrounds? Do I really care? Mm-hmm. You know, so that question you asked me, Kenny, about what is racism, I think it comes in different shapes and forms, because it all depends on where you are, what part of the country you're in, and what day of the month it is, you know. But it's basically when somebody else looks down at somebody else and thinks that I'm better than they are because of who I am and what race I belong to.
And it's subtle, isn't it?
Very subtle.
It can be very blatant. It's not just blatant. It can be subtle in our lives.
Yes.
We want to say thank you to all of our panelists tonight. You all have
Yes.
been phenomenal. We could talk for another 3 or 4 hours. Thank
Yeah.
you for
Good.
being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight for our special on our community Stronger Together as we looked at racial justice and injustice here in the Tri-Cities region.
We wish this is an issue that could be solved in a 30-minute television program, but we're realistic about that. So we hope tonight that you take something from this, from these community leaders, and walk it forward. To all of you, thank you so much for being here tonight. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. Good night.